What's going on, guys? It's Pilot Flame and I'm back with another video, and today we are talking about Dark Knight, the poster child of Final Fantasy XIV's next expansion, Shadowbringers. So Dark Knight has undergone a lot of changes, which we saw in the job action trailer as well as the media tour from North America and Europe. As a note, these are all subject to change in the final builds that will come out in the expansion. So let's get started. Dark Knight is very simplistic in terms of its on the GCD abilities. It has the one combo, as all of the aggro combos were removed. So Soul Eater being the end finisher of its only 1-2-3 combo. Siphon Strike still restores mana on hit, as well as Soul Eater now gives you the grit bonus of restoring HP, which is now a flat cure potency of 300, as well as increasing your blood gauge by 20. The Dark Knight's tank stance is still grit, which does the same as all the other tank stances, which is get increased enemy generation while it is active. So you'll probably want to keep that on the majority of the time. In terms of abilities that pretty much stayed the same or function very similarly, Unmend, Shadow Wall, Carbon Spit, and the Blackest Night. However, the Blackest Night does have a significant increase in terms of its total HP blocked. Now it's a 25% of target's maximum health, so it's a buff on yourself, but it's probably slightly worse on others. And with the duration of 7 seconds, and basically grants you Dark Arts, which has been removed and reformed into a new form of trait, which is after the barrier has been completely removed. But we'll get onto that in a second. In terms of their AoE line of abilities, Unleash is now free, thank goodness. And it now combos into an ability called Stalwart Soul, which is a 2-part combo, it being the second part, which now actually restores MP and gives you blood gauge. It's really, really good, and now it's very useful for when you're doing AoE abilities. Salted Earth took a slight nerf, with its recast timer being reduced to 90 seconds and its potency being slightly dropped. Abyssal Drain has now been reworked into an off GCD with a 60-second recast time that gives you a small cure potency as well as dealing damage to all nearby enemies with a potency of 200. In terms of how the blood gauge and mana works, now what you're going to be looking to do as a Dark Knight is gain blood gauge as well as consuming them with other abilities that are off GCDs that require big chunks of mana in order to do a lot of damage in a short space of time. So how do you do that? Well, let's start with Blood Weapon, which was changed. So now it increases your blood gauge by 10 per weapon skill or spells. So spells being off GCDs, so which is Edge of Shadow as well as Flood of Shadow, which are your two new off GCD abilities, which cost 3k MP, and just basically deal unexpected damage in an AoE or in a single target, which also extend your former Dark Side buff by 30 seconds, which basically, from what we can tell in the media tour videos, is a 10% damage increase while you have Dark Side active. And basically every time you use Flood of Shadow or Edge of Shadow, it increases this duration by 30 seconds, which is more than enough time to basically keep it up the entire fight, which is what you're going to be looking to do anyway. You still retain your abilities of Blood Spiller and Quietus, which still cost 50 blood gauge and do the AoE as well as the single target damage on the abilities respectively. You no longer gain mana from Quietus, as that's obviously been reworked into other abilities in the job. However, the main change for Dark Knight is now they have the ability called Delirium, which before was your kind of mana regen slash increase in blood weapon slash gain all this blood gauge and use crazy amounts of Quietus and Blood Spillers. Now it basically allows you for 10 seconds on a 90-second recast timer to execute the actions of Quietus or Blood Spiller without cost while restoring MP when landing either weapon skill. Now this buff does not fade over the 10-second duration, it lasts the full duration. So effectively, it's in a release from Warrior, allowing you to basically spam 5 Blood Spillers while gaining MP each time you do so, which is really, really good. Basically giving them a crazy amount of damage in a short space of time. In terms of their other cool abilities, their main one being their level 80 ability, Living Shadow, which basically conjures up a old ally of yours from the Dark Knight's storyline, who basically spams a bunch of your abilities that are use blood gauge, that use mana, as well as are just iconic Dark Knight abilities. We still are unsure whether these abilities are random or not, or whether the abilities are in some form of chain based on what you did previously. But from what we can tell, it seems pretty random. Now, in terms of your dark side abilities, I just wanted to touch on this a bit more. So your Edge of Shadow and Flood of Shadow, which are your upgraded abilities from Flood of Darkness and Edge of Darkness, just increasing in potency, can be used while Darkside is active, costing 3k mana. However, when we mention Blackest Night, you get the Dark Arts buff every time the shield is absorbed. So when it is absorbed, you get Dark Arts, which allows a free usage of Flood of Shadow or Edge of Shadow. So it basically refunds the Blackest Night entirely and allows you to gain an additional 500 potency. So you can kind of look at it in that way. In terms of raid utility, they still obviously have their basic cooldowns. Unfortunately, Dark Mind was nerfed to its non-Dark Arted value of 20 seconds for a duration of 10 seconds. However, it is still on a 60-second recast timer, so it's going to be pretty good against Magic Busters. Dark Knight is now going to be pigeonholed directly into the king of magic damage reduction with Dark Missionary, which is effectively the same thing as the Gunbreaker raid-wide utility, 15% reduction for 15 seconds on a 90-second recast timer. However, it only blocks magic damage, so it's going to be super, super good for magic damage AoEs and magic damage busters, but apart from that, it's going to look pretty weak because it only has Living Dead, which is arguably the worst invuln out of the 4 tanks from what we can tell, and it still has Shadow Wall, which all the other tanks obviously have as well. In terms of what else it offers, you gain traits as you go along. You still have the Tank Mastery trait, which we knew from before. Its Black Blood gauge obviously still exists. You get the Dark Side Mastery to increase the potency on Flood of Darkness and Flood of Shadow to Edge of Darkness and Edge of Shadow respectively at level 74. And Plunge gains 2 charges. However, it does have the enmity removed off it, but you still are able to dash 2 times, just like all of the other tanks. Basically rounding out all the tanks having a very solid gap closer, apart from Warrior, which costs 20 gauge, whereas the other ones are effectively free. And from what I remember, all the tanks' gap closers do a lot more damage than the Warrior's one, almost double, with the 200 potency being scouted from the Mediator on the tooltips of all the abilities. So how does Dark Knight's kit look overall? It looks pretty good. It's on paper, looking at the potency numbers from what we can tell, it seems to be doing the second highest amount of damage, just slightly behind Paladin. It has a very unique identity in terms of its using all these different dark type style abilities with very high emphasis on resource regeneration and resource management, because before, if you managed to overcap on blood gauge or mana slightly, it wasn't that big of a deal, whereas now it's going to be super punishing considering you're only limited to 10k MP, being a third of it pretty much is going to be used on these new abilities, Flood of Shadow and Edge of Shadow, which costs a third, like I said, a third of your MP gauge. In terms of its self-defenses, its single target is pretty good, on average. Overall, against magic damage, it's going to be absolutely insane, with Dark Mind and Blackest Night being a 25% max HP shield, so it's effectively giving you a Rampart in a bit, while still having Rampart. Its AoE is really easy to use. You're going to be able to spam 5 Quietuses with Delirium up. You still have Salted Earth, albeit a lesser of a Salted Earth, as well as you have the off GCD of Abyssal Drain, and the very easy and straightforward combo of Unleash into Stalwart Soul. One thing I would have liked to see, I would have liked to see them have, something different other than just their one combo. All the other tanks have a minimum of 2 combos, one of them being a damage one of them being more utility one, or a dot or something like that. I would have liked to see maybe potentially like Hard Slash, Siphon Strike into Scourge or something like that, which was a previous ability that they had back in Heaven's Ward. I would have liked to see something like that going on there. In terms of the roll actions, they did receive a buff in that regard. Actually, all the tanks did, without the addition of arm's length, which is a 2-minute CD, which allows you to basically not get knocked back. So Paladin accepts the buff because there's a 1-minute drop in their CD timer, and then all the other tanks get it. So it's pretty good. So now you can more or less use your gap closers for damage rather than actually using them to get back to the boss, although they're still going to be used for that as well. But in terms of all the changes, that's pretty much it for Dark Knight. It looks very cool to play. Looks like it can deal damage in very different and interesting ways. Its raid utility and single target tanking ability versus magic damage is second to none among all the other tanks, and it has pretty decent sustain in terms of keeping itself alive with Abyssal Drain and Soul Eater, which not a lot of the tanks had outside of Warrior in the last expansion and any of the previous builds of the jobs. So that's going to do it for this video today. Leave a like, thumbs up, subscribe, all that good stuff, and let me know what you think of the tanks now that we've done all of them. And next we'll be moving on to the healers to see how they're going to interact with these jobs, especially since some of them got some major overhauls to how they function. So it's a good night for me, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care.